Thanks, Jim. And I'm looking forward to kind of sharing with you guys as we kind of continue down this journey here. So let me get this open and see how we're doing. All right. So you all should be able to see the screen, and you can adjust the screen so that you can see it throughout. All right. So we're good.
We're good.
We're good. All right. So I thought I'd begin today by let me get this thing working here. There we go. I just remind you, this is the passage that we were doing, Luke 7, 1 through 10. We're taking a look about how Jesus encounters the centurion and to learn, and like I said, and use Jim's line, what else could we be doing more effectively on a Friday morning? And as we look at that slide, that's what we did last week. We took a look in the one that's in red, and you'll see the redemptive vision and mentality. That was kind of where we started with. And that was the first part, because what I shared last week, for those of you that weren't here, was as I went through this passage, I was just going through it kind of quickly at first, but I kept coming back to it, and I kind of got stuck in it. And I started seeing all these things started making meaning. And I felt like it was a place where I was supposed to hang out. And there were some things there that God wanted to teach me. And so I started to take some notes as I went along. And that first part was this idea of a redemptive vision and mentality. And so last week, that's what we talked about. We talked about, what does it mean to be redemptive? And I use words like it means like a fresh start, a new trajectory, and an intent for goodness, right? To seek to restore, to be in the restoration business, to refinish, to assist in restoring his intended creation. And then what we did last week was I talked a little bit about, how can you have a redemptive mentality this week? I was trying to challenge you with that. And maybe it might look like forgiving someone or helping someone else forgive someone, right? Anything that was kind of like under Galatians 5:16 about faith expressing itself through love. And my encouragement about it, and what I really thought was powerful on this too, was that when we make moves to be redemptive, when we let go, as we say, and let God take over and help others, it becomes contagious. It really does. And others become a part of it. So last week's big application was, how will you expand your redemptive mentality this week? In the midst of all the craziness, how could we do it? So, I told Jim this, and I really appreciate that he put that in the notes yesterday in his email, that we were going to start out today, instead of just moving on quickly right back to the next part, like, we got to stop and let's set and let's think, how did we have opportunities to live out a redemptive mentality, and I put in here too, like, we're not bragging here. This isn't being prideful, but I was just going to stop and ask if you could just briefly share any redemptive moments over the last week where you felt like, it was a change in trajectory. I just love that there was a fresh start. There was an intent for goodness, an opportunity to seek to restore. So Jim, if you want to kind of unmute the guys, if they're not already, and give them, I'd love for a couple of you just to briefly share, maybe if there was a moment last week where you felt like what we talked about was at play.
Okay, well, everyone's going to have to unmute themselves. There is no unmute all button.
So yeah, so if you have something to say, unmute. Yeah.
So we're looking for someone who's willing to be the first person talking.
So can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So we're spending a lot of time at Home Depot, and we're doing this kitchen, restore and thing. So we're always going over to Home Depot, and every time we go through the line, we're always talking to the people that are checking us out, and always want to try to encourage them and say a positive word and lift them up, because I feel sorry for them to some degree, because they're all standing there behind these masks and they can hardly breathe, and they're standing there 8 hours, and it's really, really terrible, what they have to go through. But most of them have a very, very positive attitude to begin with, but I always try to start out with, how's your day gone? How much time do you have left on your shift? You're doing a great job. Thank you for helping us out here, and things like that. And inevitably, it turns into a spiritual conversation. We end up talking about the Lord somehow. And I'm not sure how all that works, other than the Holy Spirit just does that. It just
Mhm.
opens up. So we end up talking about the Lord, and we find there's a number of Christians over there, and yeah, we ask them what church they go to and things like that. So it's a very, very uplifting thing every time we go to Home Depot. It could be just a chore, just going in and out, and yeah, we got to get this stuff, and let's get home, and but no, if you're open to the Lord, and it has to relate to Jesus. It can't just be, I mean, if there's that opening there, you always want to bring Jesus in because he's the only one that can redeem us. He's the redemption for us. So related to the cross somehow, and to some people it's foolishness, but to those that are open, you see a really really positive response. So anyway, that's just my story of Home Depot.
You know what I like about that, Glenn, too, is that you can look back and you can see where God kind of set it up for you. So as you kind of reflect back on that, you have an opportunity to kind of see what God was doing on that. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And we're actually starting to build relationships with these people too. We
Right.
recognize the same ones and we go back again and we say hi and we carry on the conversation, where we left off. And it's kind
Cool.
of cool.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to share one quick one. I had a student that was transferring from Bucknell, it's in rural Pennsylvania, baseball player coming here to Biola. And he wanted to get in some of the classes. He didn't have the right prerequisites. He hadn't taken the exact classes that he needed. And so it was a pretty, to be honest with you, kind of a black and white kind of an issue. I mean, simply, he just did not hit the thing. And, he made a request. We said no. And then he appealed it, which kind of angered me a little bit. It was like, come on. And then he appealed it. I had to write him back. I had to get my boss involved, and we had to do this. And then it went kind of back and forth for about a week. And yeah, and so it was pretty much it was a done deal. It was over. And I wrote him back and just said something like, hey, that's, I'm sorry this didn't work out for you, but this is, it's what we have to do because we have to maintain this. And I felt like I needed to talk with him at least, because everything had been over email. And I'm not the hero in the story at all. It was an interesting thing. I went and said to him, would you like to have like a little Google, like a Zoom meeting and talk a little bit more about this? And it was really interesting. We had it, and he started sharing that the reason he had left was that he was just tired of the scene where he was at and partying, and he really was making a change to come to Biola. And that one of the coaches was also leaving Bucknell and was going to be a baseball coach here at Biola. So I sensed this movement that was happening in this guy's life, that God was doing something redemptive in his life. God was showing this young man a new trajectory, an intent for goodness, a new direction, a fresh start. I really felt those exact words for this kid. And so I found myself in the conversation going from, here's the law, here's the rules, I just wanted to be nice here, to like talking to him. And we ended up talking for a long, long time, to the point where I said, why don't we just talk tomorrow? There's a couple of things I want you to do. He did all the things I wanted him to do. We ended up talking on Tuesday, same thing. We went and talked a long, long, long time. And sure enough, I sent an email telling him that he could get into the class and that we were going to waive the requirement. And the reason for it was I felt like this kid was in a process of a redemptive moment, and my job was to help in that regard. So I don't know. It was and I got to tell you, this last part is really important. I did not want to let go of this. My pride was like, no way, kid. This is it. I'm not going to do this for you. And there was a battle of like, I'm not letting go of this. I'd already put myself out there and said no. I'd already said no several times. But if you remember in the definition last week, one of the things, it's a sacrifice. There's letting go. And I did not want to let go of this. And yet I really felt like I was supposed to. So it ended up being a pretty cool moment for me. So anyways, I wanted to share that. I want to encourage you though, gentlemen, as we go forward, just to be thinking about this, to be open, as Matt, as Glenn was sharing. I mean, just be open to what the Spirit of God might be wanting to do with you in that, and looking for those redemptive, those redemptive moments, to have that redemptive mentality. I just think that's really, really important. All right, I'm gonna.
Les, before you go on.
Yes, sir.
Norman. I find that interesting because in most conflicts like that, unless you personally, you took an extra step on your own personal, you knew what the rules were, but you felt that you needed to make a connection. Yeah. And in most business transactions, most personal transactions, if the two of you can't make that connection, because he kept reaching out, but until you opened the door,
yeah,
you would not have known what you actually ended up doing.
Yeah,
and that's where the biggest conflict that I see in terms of trying to get a goodness or restoring issue is that it still is two-way. If you hadn't opened the door, he would still be out the door.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have opened the door, Norm, unless there was an urge, an undisclosed kind of a push that said, you ought to listen to what he has to say, or at least
he wasn't playing you. He truly was giving you a reason.
But that was my first thought, though.
Yep.
Exactly. It really was he's trying to, here we go again. Here's going to be this baseball player. It's going to try to work the system. And I'm not going to I'm not going to play that game. I've been here for 30 years. I know how this goes. And so it was really, there was a battle with me to even have the conversation, but then, it was interesting. I've already had him in class now this last week, and he's done a great job. He's a very intelligent young man. I really can look back, and I think a little bit like when Glenn was saying he looked back on Home Depot, I can look back on this and I really see God's hand in that stuff. And it was pretty cool. So it was cool. Thanks, Norm. Thanks for the encouragement, bud. Appreciate you. Really do. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of move forward, get us back, and we're going to look at the next thing of this. We're going to be talking, I want to read the passage again because I think it's so important just to make sure we have the right context and we're looking at the whole thing. So here we go. It should be on your screen. When Jesus had finished saying, actually, let me pray. I haven't prayed yet. Father God, thank you for this time. In the middle of everything going on with our own selves, our own battles spiritually, our own battles physically, our own battles mentally, our own battles relationally, we seek you in the middle of them. We seek your redemptive power in the midst of all those battles because we cannot do them on our own. We are needy for you. And so I pray you would guide us. Help me to communicate some of the things that I think that you taught me about Capernaum today that I think are valuable. And so I pray that you would continue to teach us some interesting things about this passage, and that we wouldn't just listen to it and learn from it, but we would live it out. And I want to pray for everybody that you would urge us, give us eyes that are open to have a redemptive mentality and to be seeking those moments to help others with a fresh start, a trajectory, and ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So
before you jump in.
Yes, sir.
I want to share something. I got a text message from one of the guys at the breakfast, and he asked for somebody's phone number to call somebody. And I thought, oh, there's a guy that listened on Friday morning. On Monday, everything was past. My mind was on somewhere else. Right. There's a guy who listened on Friday morning, and he's actually going to reach out to one of our brothers and offer some encouragement. Cool. Well, if he's going to do it, by God, I have to do it.
Yeah.
And, what happens, right, if he does it and I don't? So I want you to know that there were probably more things happening than you heard on the screen this morning.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I'm sure there is. And guys don't want to sit there and, brag about stuff. And I get that. And it's kind of awkward. But I think it's also important, though, for us to share those God moments because they become contagious and we start to see them in others. And so, that's always a fine line. So, I remember in seminary the guy going, you never preach a story about yourself where you're the hero. You know, I always remembered that, you know, like, yeah, you can talk about where you messed up, but don't talk about, you know, and at the same time, we want to talk about Jesus is the hero, but for us to be part of that story, I think is important, and to have eyes to see that. Thanks, Jimbo. Here we go. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion servant whom his master valued highly was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he built our synagogue. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one to go and he goes, and that one to come and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. So when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel. And then the men who had sent returned to the house and found the servant well. So the question that we're always asking as we go through this passage, and one that that I've kind of chosen to be the center of this all, was why was Jesus so amazed? You know, what was it about this centurion's faith that Jesus explicitly let others know this was so special, this was so unique? I mean, what was going on? Because when I just read him giving this little speech, which I always thought was just this little speech about, you know, I do this and then you can do this. And what I've discovered is that there was so much more going on. So today we're going to look at just a couple of those early verses and really center on a couple of things, primarily Capernaum. So when Jesus finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. And so today, again, the same thing as we did before, we're looking at this slide, but now the red parts is what was really going on in Capernaum and this idea of a red zone. In fact, I have two questions for today. And these are the ones I want us to tackle. What do we know about Capernaum above and below the surface around AD 30, right? So AD 30 be about time Jesus was there, right? Ballpark. So what was going on in that place, you know? And I had some ideas of what I thought and then what I learned. And then the second part is, how would the situation in Capernaum speak to the centurion's faith? I think those are two good questions to kind of look at and say, okay, you know, what's the role of this town, and why would a town have something to do with it? So let me do a little bit of background, because I think this is an important part of the story. So there's this kind of where Capernaum is. You see some of the cities. I put a little arrow there. But what I want you to see on that was, you know, this was a fishing village that had a lot of different people coming and going. And you see the Jordan River coming in and out of it. And you see where people were coming in and out of the Sea of Galilee. And it was a pretty, you know, a well-traveled place, if you will, of exchange, of business, and that part. And where Capernaum was located, it was just known as a small kind of fishing village. And so I just, you know, this was kind of my initial thought. Obviously, those aren't the boats that were there. But the idea of that was my initial thought of what Capernaum was. Capernaum was a small, cute, calm fishing village. I mean, that really was the picture in my mind of, you know, if someone had said, hey, Les, what's Capernaum like? That would be the kind of picture I would have driven, would have looked at. But what surfaced, you know, what came about on this was a little bit different about this village. So let's take a look at it. It was a much smaller town than what I thought. It's only about 350 yards. Hey, gentlemen, 2 weeks ago, Norm was speaking about Nineveh. Do y'all remember that talk? Right? You remember he was talking about Nineveh. Talked about how long was it to get from one point to the other part of the town? Y'all remember that? 3 days.
3 days.
Yeah, it's 3 days to get through the town of Nineveh, right? Check this out, guys. It's 300 to 350 yards. That's basically 3.5 football fields. I mean, seriously, that's not very big. It was much smaller than what I had thought about. And this is important because we know Jesus did a lot there, and people would have heard it. I mean, when you have this small town, they said they estimated only about 1,500 people lived there around 30 AD. So you've got a lot of people stuck together in a pretty small place, and then you've got a lot of people coming and going. So just, you start to think about this, because again, we're trying to get a feel. Jesus is going to come into Capernaum. What's this town like? And you've got a lot of trading. You got this fishing village going on. You've got people of different faiths, cultures coming and going. And then you've got temperatures are in the 90s and 100s. You've got a lot of very, very poor Jewish, it's a very poor Jewish village, to be honest with you. And that's exactly what it is. And we know that even because one of the miracles that Jesus did there, as you remember, is when those guys put the paralytic through the roof. Well, they just took the roof right off. And that kind of speaks to this, again, I'm not going to go into all the history of the houses, but it just, when you can knock a roof off in about 2 seconds, gives you an idea. There's a lot of very, very poor, it was a very poor people who were just getting by. And there was a Roman garrison there with around 100 soldiers. So you have a pretty small town, a lot of people, and you got about 100 soldiers around there as well that were keeping that so-called Roman law, to keep the peace. But that's debatable. And the village was connected to the Roman Imperial Highway. I thought that was I never heard Imperial Highway before, and kind of wonder where Imperial Highway comes from. But anyways, the Roman Imperial Highway with straight streets. So it definitely had a Greek Roman, a Roman influence on a small Jewish town, right? And that was very customary of the Romans to kind of show their presence. And right in the middle of the town is the synagogue, right? And they actually found this remodel that they did of Capernaum. And this is kind of what they thought that it would look like. And if you look right in the middle where that red dot is, you'll see where that synagogue. That's where the synagogue is. And you remember the story at the end there, not the story, the passage where he says, when he asked, the elders asked Jesus to heal him and say, this centurion has been good to us. He built the synagogue. And so this synagogue he built wasn't something on the outskirts of town it's actually, as you can see, they figured it was a significant part. Here's another picture that someone painted of it, and it's not much different. And again, you see the synagogue right in the middle of it. And so you get kind of a grasp. This wasn't a big place. It had a lot of these things going on. And as we unpack this, you're going to see this is an important part of the story. Now, what else do we know about this? Well, we know that this was the place of operations for Jesus. We know Capernaum was a town where a lot of people think it was his home. It was kind of his hometown after Nazareth. There's history here. So when Jesus comes down from doing the Sermon on the Mount, he walks into Capernaum, and that's where our passage begins. But this was not the first time Jesus was there, because it was in Capernaum that he taught with authority in the synagogue, that he healed many who were ill with various diseases and cast out many demons from those that were demon possessed, which is an interesting thing to me. That means there's a lot going on in this small town. And this is where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. And we know right afterwards, one of the times he left is when he, stilled the storms in the Sea of Galilee. And I think it's interesting too. When we look at the people in Capernaum, there were many questions on who exactly Jesus was. And even though he did all those miracles in that small town, which everyone would have known, these weren't isolated. Everybody would have known about this, from the centurion to the soldiers to the people. It's just too small of a little town when all these miracles are happening. They would have gotten wind of it. And yet it's interesting that they were judged for that in the midst of the miracles, they were judged for their disbelief and their indifference. And Jesus uses the term that they would descend to Hades. So you have a place where Jesus has been present, been doing explicit miracles, and there is still this idea of disbelief in it. And my whole take on this was Capernaum was full of anger, resentment, and disappointment. And gentlemen, I think as I move forward, I want to make very clear what one of my main points are today, is that this is kind of like when you turn on the news. Capernaum's not far different from what we're seeing every day. You flip to the channels of the news, depending on what channel you go to, and you're going to start seeing this chaos. this red zone, and you see things that you didn't. And although I, you know, and I want to share with you some of those things that I think were going on below and above the surface. Okay. And then I'll take a little break here in a minute. I don't want to just overwhelm you, but we need to get a feel of what was really going on in Capernaum. First of all, in this very small town, you got a lot of people that were sick and had various diseases. And again, just think about that. I mean, you walk in a town and it's very obvious that there was a lot of people, that there were a lot of people that were demon possessed among the village. So just imagine that, just hear that, smell the disease. I mean, this is 30 AD. It's hot. There's a lot of demon possessed people around here. This isn't all of a sudden this cute little fishing village. There were people that are physically, mentally, and spiritual issues all around that town. There was hatred between the Jews and the Romans. Hatred between these two groups. And they were right there, and the unclean, you know, they thought, I mean, when Jesus is asked to go into the house, and this was mentioned last week, you know, they would never, the whole idea of a Jew going into an unclean Gentile's house was just, that alone was just against every cultural thing, right? But Jesus always did that. He didn't go by those rules. And there was a resentment between the Jews, these poor Jews, and the Jewish elders and Pharisees, right? Just think about it. You got these Pharisees with their long robes, always judging, always telling everyone else that they're coming up short with their ridiculous laws. You with me on that? I mean, it's just this idea of like, you know, they were not encouraging them, right? They're the church leaders of discouragement. And that plays a role in this. I mean, it contributes to the story. And I think there was a lot of people that were poor and stuck in generational poverty. They'd been in a fishing village and they were poor the generation before, the generation before that, and the generation after that. And I think too, I thought about this. You know, if there's so many sick people and demon possessed, there's got to be people that are taking care of the sick and the demon possessed, and those people are probably exhausted. Jesus is walking into something that has a lot going on. There's more tension between the slaves and slave owners. There would be tension between the immigrants that are coming from other cultures, bringing different values, customs, traditions. Gentlemen, are you seeing where I'm going with this? I am trying to paint a picture that Capernaum AD 30 has differences, but there's some common ground between that and 2020. And you've got just tension all around. You have the angst of the Jews awaiting for a Messiah to rescue them from bondage, to rescue them from the Romans. That's what they wanted. And then this was one I thought was pretty interesting, because I studied a lot about what it meant to be a centurion, and I'll talk about that maybe another day, because that is really interesting. But just thinking about the Roman soldiers, you know, they trained twice a day. If you read anything about the success of the Roman army and why they were able to be so successful, you will hear a word, and the word is called discipline. They were incredibly disciplined. And if you broke discipline, you were literally executed by them. And there were some pretty cruel, hurtful ways, but how did you get killed? If you broke discipline. They took discipline as the number one thing. So there would be tension of Roman soldiers coming from Italy, being stuck in Capernaum. I get the idea that they're kind of bored. They're training twice a day. Gentlemen, you get the idea these guys got some hormones going. These guys are ready to fight. I mean, I kind of get the idea that, you know, sitting around as a soldier in a place to quote unquote keep the peace of a 1,500, I mean, you know, people that aren't armed, a little fishing village. I have a feeling that they were ready to go. And last but not least, you just got to think of Satan's presence. And I don't know about you, but when you watch TV and they start showing some really horrible things that are going on, in some of the chaos, the fires, the looting, the beatings, the murders, we hear that and we can grow numb to that. But I would imagine many of you hear that and cannot help but think about how Satan is having some real success in some of these areas. I think you would agree with me on that. Spiritual battle that just threads through the city. Okay. So here was my idea of Capernaum. That's what I thought Capernaum. I did my research. I did some homework. I studied it. And now this is what I think of Capernaum. I think this is a more accurate postcard. And I know that's, I mean, obviously it's not from AD 30, but I really do see that when Jesus walks into Capernaum, he's not walking into calm and beauty. He's walking into chaos. All right, so let me stop there for just a second and kind of open up again. What part of what I just shared surprised you? You agree with? Just gave you some background on Capernaum and what was going on above and below the surface. So what did you observe in that? What stuck out to you in that part? I'd love to hear.
Well, one of the things is for it to have a synagogue, it
Yeah.
had to be one of the larger of those towns.
Yeah.
Because we learned from Paul that he would go to the synagogue, so he would go through and essentially bypass certain towns so he could go to one that was large enough to have a synagogue.
Right.
Yeah. So these Roman soldiers, as bad as Capernaum it was probably one of the more metropolitan places in that region.
Yeah.
And so, but with 1,500 people and a garrison of soldiers, you would also have to think at some point that there was interactions between them on a more almost community type level over a course of time.
Yep. I mean, I don't know what it was like, right? But I mean, I totally agree with you, Jay. I think it's interesting too that the town, like you said, would be big enough to have a synagogue, and how ironic that the synagogue was built by the Centurion, or at least helped by the Centurion, a Gentile that helped build the synagogue. So that in itself is pretty ironic. I remember being in the Philippines years and years ago, and on every corner there were police officers with AK-47s, and it was just I remember the first day just being there, and the uncomfortableness of having them around. It didn't do anything. There was no conflict, but just their presence. Their presence impacted the way some of the small towns in the Philippines maneuvered. And I would have to think too that this garrison would have an impact on the rest of the town in a way. Now, if my thinking there would have been more hostile, but then again, there could have been some really great conversations. And again, it looks like the Centurion was perhaps part of some of those. Thank you, Jay.
I think the Centurion, because when you read the passage, it wasn't just the slave he was asking to heal. He almost considered him a friend. He was that close to the slave, at least the way I read into it. So that relationship between the Romans, at least the higher end Romans, and the normal people was pretty tight. So that's part of why he would have built this synagogue.
And that's one of the things that's hard. It's hard to know, Norm, his motivations. And I thought that was, and again, I'll talk, I might, if I do this again or continue with this, we could really speak in it. It's hard to know if his motivations were to keep the peace or if his motivations were the goodness, but we definitely see something of him and his love for his own slave that seems to be very special. And very special isn't the right word. I mean, just to be very connected, as you had said that. And I don't know, what we don't know was that normal, or was this part of the Centurion who was being moved by the Spirit of God. So again, it's one of those things that's hard to it's hard to kind of determine on that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Good take. Thank you, sir. All right, so I'm going to continue up, kind of wrap this up. Here we go. And now, as the tensions, we have all these tensions I just showed you, and now we have Jesus comes into town. And Jesus has a way of being a divider to get to the truth, right? He does that through God. So many interactions. He knows how to figure out and to get to the core truth of things. He is the line in the sand. He doesn't just draw it, he lines up. I think this is really important because I think this is one of the things that this situation did with the Roman, with the centurion. I think that's kind of what Norm was saying, was that Jesus exposes to you who you really are. He already knows, but he puts a mirror to your face. He exposes to you who you really are. And in so many interactions, you see this. And literally, I could give you, I think, honestly, 20 different examples. I mean, you think about the paralytic by the pools, do you really want to be healed? To the Pharisees, how many times did he put a mirror to their face and show their hypocrisy? I mean, time after time after time. The rich young ruler, you know, so what you have, he has this powerful way, and I think he's done it to each of us on this call today. He has a way of exposing to us and for us, not against us, but for us to see who we really are. He has this powerful way of doing that. And why do I mention that? Because you already have all this tension, you have all this thing going on in Capernaum, and then you bring him into town, and it's just going to illuminate more things. So we talked about what was going on below the surface, but what does this have to do with the centurion's faith? And I just thought there was a few things here that I thought were pretty important as you kind of look at this thing. You have all this tension, you have all this chaos. Jesus is coming down the mountain with a crowd of people coming into the town. I'm thinking, you got some Roman soldiers that were anxiously awaiting the order to put their daily training and discipline to the test, right? I really believe that. I believe Roman soldiers were probably inquiring. I'm thinking, I could be wrong on this, right? I'm throwing this out, that, you know, should we arrest him? Should we arrest the crowd? You know, I think there would have been anxiety of the people that there's going to be more chaos now. Jesus is coming to town because they're not seeing him as the Messiah. We know that. So we know that they didn't get even in the midst of the miracle. So him coming back in, would they be happy about that he's going to heal more people? Or would they thought, oh God, here comes more chaos, right? And so should they arrest him? You know, and all the eyes are on this centurion, because this centurion is the biggest dog in town, right? Before Jesus comes. He is the biggest dog in town. There would be no one above the centurion in that. You know, the Jewish Pharisees may thought that they were, but they weren't. He is the biggest dog, and they're all waiting his command. And they're waiting to hear what he says. And what does he say? Find that Jesus and see if he'll heal my servant. I don't think that's what a lot of people were expecting to hear from him. I don't think that would have been the words that some people would have expected. And as you realize this in his faith, you start to realize that, again, I go back to this idea that he exposes, but that requesting Jesus' help was a risky request of the centurion. That was not an easy thing to do. And here's my point I'm trying to make, gentlemen. We're looking at why is his faith so amazing. Faith is risky. To take a risk, to put yourself out there, to not hide behind the mask. So requesting Jesus' help was a risky request of the centurion. It was risky in front of the Roman soldiers where Caesar was God. Remember that Caesar wasn't just a leader, he was considered a god. Faith is risky. You know, and I've heard many sermons over my life to talk about how are you risking your faith? Because if you're not risking your faith, that resistance is part of us growing in faith. And it was risky for a centurion Gentile to ask a Jew not only for medical help, but for a miracle, because he wasn't asking him to come, and he was asking him to heal him. He was in front of these people. He's asking to heal him. And again, this is just the first part of this passage, because his second request is going to show even more faith. But this was like the first building block. It was an unselfish request. That's part of faith, to help his servant. Oh, oops, sorry about that. And then let me go back on that. And then it was initial request, to me, required sacrifice and humility on his part. I really think that. This is the biggest dog in town. He's dressed differently from everybody. He's in his, I assume he's in his Centurion outfit, which if you know, you have a lot going on here. And then he makes this request, and I believe this request required some sacrifice on his part and humility, which are key parts of faith as a Christian. Sacrifice and humility. And because the centurion did not allow the external resistance and circumstances to determine his internal resolve. And where I'm going with this as I wrap this up in the next couple of minutes here is going back to the idea that in the craziness that we live, are we allowing the external resistance and circumstances to determine our internal resolve? And I got to tell you, I've really struggled with, and I shared this last time, from the moment this COVID hit in the middle of March, it has been hard on me. I've had a very difficult time. And the best moments come when I'm focused on my faith internally and not allowing all the chaos, all the insanity to determine that, to impact that, to ruin everything. I mean, to be able to come back into my faith, to be a place. And I think we can really learn. I think we can learn from that. That centurion, why was his faith so amazing? He was able to, in the midst of that, be able to not let pressure from Roman soldiers, pressure from anybody, simply, I want to heal and love my servant. Can this Jesus heal him? I want to send him over to that. And so I give you this. I think, it's all good. I've seen this. I thought this picture was kind of, hey, everything's good. We're all good. And my question was, how important is your authenticity in chaos and tension? Because guys, a lot of us, when I've preached on transparency, I used the term, we wear a mask. That was way before COVID. And the question was, now we are actually literally wearing a mask. And how much easier is it to hide behind the mask, if you will? I love this picture. I really love this picture. His eyes tell you one story, but the mask tries to tell you something else. That he's happy, merry, jolly, chippy, upbeat, happy. What's going on behind the mask? And how can we be authentic men of God in the midst of chaos? So I'm going to pray, Jim, give you the ball. Lord, thank you. I pray, Lord, that in the midst of chaos and tension around us, that our internal resolve of our faith in you, of the love that you have for us, will sustain us. And Lord, I pray that we don't easily hide behind our masks, and try to find sanctuary in not being authentic. But Lord, help us to be the authentic men of God that you've called us to be, and not let masks and tension and chaos direct the way we love. Let us love freely in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Les. That was wonderful.